Before we dive into the utterly riveting world of medieval village chicken coop inspection procedures, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on loop so you can listen to this enthralling saga on repeat. Trust me, you're going to want to revel in this mind-numbing journey again and again. Now, if you've ever thought that watching paint dry could use a little more adventure, you're in for a treat. Today, we're delving into a subject so thrilling, it could be the next blockbuster hit, if only Hollywood knew how to spice things up with a little medieval foul play. Yes, dear viewers, we're about to explore the exasperating history of chicken coop inspections in the Middle Ages, a topic that has been largely overshadowed by more exciting events, like the Black Plague and the 100 Years' War. Imagine, if you will, a bustling medieval village. The aroma of fresh-baked bread wafts through the air. Children play in the dusty streets, and yet, lurking in the shadows, village inspectors are preparing to scrutinize the most vital aspect of rural life, the chicken coop. Why, you ask? Because in a world where food security was as scarce as a toothy night, the health and productivity of poultry could make or break a village, leading to existential crises that would make modern-day Twitter feuds look like a friendly chat over tea. Yeesh. The meticulous procedures for inspecting these coops were far from glamorous. With a clipboard made from the finest parchment, a quill fashioned from a goose feather, and an eye for detail that would make a hawk weep with envy, inspectors would wander from coop to coop, assessing everything from the cleanliness of the straw to the dietary habits of the hens. Spoiler alert. If a chicken was found to be pecking at last week's moldy leftovers, it was not just a health hazard, it was a scandal that could lead to a village-wide poultry panic. So, brace yourselves as we embark on this trek through time, where every cluck and feather tells a story. Sit back, relax, and prepare to be captivated by the complexities of medieval bureaucracy. Yes, it's a thing, and it's about to lay its eggs all over your unsuspecting brain. As we delve deeper into the labyrinth of medieval village chicken coop inspections, it's crucial to understand the sheer weight of the bureaucracy involved in these poultry evaluations. Picture it, a bustling village square, the scent of manure wafting on the breeze, and the sound of squawking hens mingling with the murmur of concerned villagers. At the heart of this clucking chaos stood the appointed inspectors of poultry, revered and reviled in equal measure. First things first, let's discuss inventory procedures. Oh yes, because what would a medieval chicken coop inspection be without a thorough inventory? Each coop was required to keep a detailed log of its residents, affectionately referred to as the Poultry Population Register. This document, often penned in the finest medieval script, listed every chicken, rooster, and heaven forbid, any unauthorized squatter, like a rogue duck or an overly ambitious goose. These registers were not just for show. They were essential in determining the tax obligations of the village. You see, the noble lords and ladies had a vested interest in the income generated by the poultry trade, and if a villager was found to be harboring an extra chicken that had not been officially registered, it could lead to severe penalties. And by severe penalties, I mean a stern talking followed by a hefty fine that could buy you an entire year's worth of grain, or just a couple of fancy hats, depending on your priorities. Next on our journey through coop inspection procedures is the matter of material costs. Let's break it down. Straw, nails, wood, and the occasional feather duster were the primary materials involved in coop construction and maintenance. Straw was the gold standard for bedding, deemed cozy enough for even the most aristocratic of hens, while simultaneously being relatively inexpensive. Villagers soon learned that purchasing high-quality straw was akin to investing in a luxury item. If the straw was too cheap, you might as well invite vermin to your coop and throw a party. Nails, on the other hand, were a commodity of great importance. The type and quality of nails used to construct the coops could make or break an inspector's approval. Some inspectors would go so far as to carry a small selection of nails in their satchel, ready to demonstrate to errant coop owners just what kind of craftsmanship would earn their flock a passing grade. "You call this a coop?" an inspector might exclaim, holding up a crooked nail with the look of a sommelier appraising a subpar wine. "I've seen better craftsmanship from a 5-year-old with a stick and some mud." Now, let's not forget the bureaucratic rules that govern these inspections. The Inspector's Code, as it was reverently called, laid out a series of guidelines that could rival the length of a medieval epic. Each inspector was required to memorize the rules regarding coop dimensions, because apparently, chickens have very specific spatial requirements. Did you know that a standard coop was supposed to provide at least 4 square feet of space per hen? Can you imagine the horror of cramming a dozen hens into a coop designed for 6? An inspector would faint, clutching their clipboard as they gasped in horror at the sight of overcrowded fowl. And then there was the matter of coop hygiene. Inspectors had a keen eye for cleanliness, with a checklist that would make any modern-day health inspector weep with joy. Items on this checklist included the cleanliness of the feed containers, the absence of pests, and whether or not the coop was free from unsightly droppings. Yes, droppings were a significant point of contention. If a coop was found to be overly soiled, the owner could be forced to engage in a vigorous cleaning campaign that could last for days, much to the delight of their neighbors, who would undoubtedly hear all about it for the next fortnight. Speaking of feed, let's take a moment to address the dietary habits of the chickens. Inspectors were not merely looking for a good selection of grains. They were also assessing the balance of nutrients in the chickens' diets, because a well-fed chicken is a happy chicken, and happy chickens lay the best eggs. Inspectors would scrutinize whether the feed contained a proper mix of corn, barley, and in some cases the remnants of last week's stew. Yes, you heard that right. Some villagers resorted to feeding their chickens leftover scraps in a bid to save money. But beware. If an inspector found any hint of mold or foul odors emanating from the feed, the consequences could be dire. The offending coop could be marked for re-inspection, and the owner would then have to present their case at a village council meeting, where the entire community would have a front-row seat to this poultry drama. And let's not forget the impact of weather on these inspections. The rainy season, for instance, was a nightmare for inspectors. Coops constructed with subpar drainage could quickly turn into mud pits, and chickens, being the discerning creatures they are, would refuse to step outside. Inspectors would wander through puddles, muttering about the blight of poor construction while documenting the soggy conditions in their meticulous reports. Good luck explaining that to a lord who expected a steady stream of eggs every morning. Now, if you think the inspections were just about assessing the coops and their feathered inhabitants, think again. Inspectors were also tasked with evaluating the overall morale of the poultry. Yes, you heard that correctly. A flock of disenchanted hens could signal impending doom for a village's egg production. Inspectors would be seen chatting with the hens, engaging in what can only be described as poultry therapy sessions, trying to discern whether the clucking sounded more like a lament or a song of joy. If the hens were unhappy, it was often a reflection of their owner's mismanagement, which could lead to a flurry of gossip over who had the most disgruntled flock. Furthermore, let's talk about the paperwork. The joy of medieval bureaucracy. Each inspection resulted in a report that was painstakingly copied and filed away for future reference. These records were so important that they were kept in a locked chest, which was itself a topic of much debate among the village elders. How secure was this chest? Was it really necessary to have an entire assembly just to discuss its placement? Spoiler alert, it was absolutely necessary. The fate of the village's poultry industry hinged on proper documentation, and any missing paperwork could lead to chaos. Think lost chickens, miscalculated taxes, and, God forbid, a shortage of eggs at the market. As we round the corner on this riveting journey through the exasperating history of chicken coop inspections, let's take a moment to appreciate the far-reaching implications of these procedures. Behind every successful medieval village was an invisible army of inspectors, clipboard in hand, ensuring that the clucking masses were healthy, happy, and most importantly, productive. They laid the foundation for modern poultry management, whether we like to admit it or not, and their dedication to this seemingly absurd bureaucracy is a testament to the complexities of village life. So, the next time you crack open a carton of eggs, take a moment to ponder the legacy of those tireless inspectors and their feathered charges. After all, behind every egg is a story begging to be told, and perhaps a few bureaucratic nightmares waiting to be uncovered. Now, let's delve deeper into the labyrinthine world of chicken coop inspections. An enterprise as thrilling as watching paint dry, but infinitely more convoluted. The procedure was not merely a casual stroll through a chicken yard. It was a meticulously planned operation that resembled a military campaign more than a simple poultry checkup. The inspectors, often clad in the most unremarkable attire imaginable, think drab tunics and sturdy boots, were equipped with an arsenal of tools. A clipboard, the medieval equivalent of a high-tech gadget, a measuring stick for coop dimensions, and a magnifying glass, which, I can only assume, was primarily for inspecting chicken droppings. First things first, let's talk about inventory procedures. Each village had a system in place for tracking the number of chickens in each coop. This was not just a whimsical tally. It was an elaborate record-keeping operation that could rival the best practices of modern corporate logistics. Inspectors would arrive at dawn, before the roosters had even had their first crow of the day, and set to work, counting chickens as if they were gold coins in a miser's vault. They would record the species, age, and health status of each bird, along with a variety of other details that would make the average person's eyes glaze over. The paperwork was a veritable cornucopia of forms and reports, each one more tedious than the last. There was the chicken health certificate, which would require the input of detailed medical histories for every bird. Imagine trying to fill out a form for your pet cat, but instead you have to describe the life story of every single chicken in your possession. You'd need to note any signs of illness, which would vary from the benign, a mild case of feather pecking, to the catastrophic, an outbreak of avian flu that could send the village into a tailspin. Then there was the Coop Compliance Report, a document that assessed whether the coop met the village's standards for safety and hygiene. This included everything from the dimensions of the coop, which had to adhere to strict regulations that were, frankly, more complex than the laws governing the construction of cathedrals, which had to be no less than nesting boxes, which had to be no less than the netara, 3 feet apart to prevent chicken squabbles, because heaven forbid there be a pecking order dispute that escalates into full-blown chicken warfare. And let us not forget the importance of material costs in this grand bureaucratic dance. Inspectors had to be well-versed in local building materials. Wood, straw, and an alarming amount of chicken wire were the holy trinity of coop construction. A well-constructed coop could cost a villager a small fortune, often siphoning off valuable resources that could have been used for more pressing matters, like purchasing a new plow, or, I don't know, a loaf of bread. Tea? The cost of building supplies fluctuated wildly based on the season. In the spring, when the demand for new coops peaked as villagers prepared for the chick-hatching frenzy, prices would soar. A savvy villager might wait until autumn, when the demand dropped, and the local suppliers were eager to unload their inventory. But of course, that strategy came with its own set of risks, namely the possibility of a chicken shortage that could lead to a devastating egg famine. Now don't get me started on the fines. Oh, the fines. If an inspector discovered that a coop was not up to snuff, let's say it was too small, poorly ventilated, or had a suspiciously large hole that seemed tailor-made for foxes, there would be penalties to pay. Villagers could be fined a hefty sum that was often equivalent to several weeks' worth of eggs. This was especially cruel considering that the eggs were often the villagers' primary source of income, which meant that the inspector was essentially holding the family's livelihood hostage. Pendao. And let us not overlook the bureaucratic rules surrounding coop inspections. Every village had its own set of regulations, many of which were absurdly specific. For instance, in some regions, inspectors were required to wear a special badge that indicated they had completed training in chicken ethics. Yes, that's right, chicken ethics. These training sessions were rumored to involve a lot of discussions about the moral implications of chicken ownership and the importance of treating your feathered friends with dignity. How. Moreover, these inspectors had to be well acquainted with the local folklore surrounding chickens, as certain superstitions could affect the perceived health of a flock. A chicken that laid a double yolk egg could be seen as a harbinger of good fortune, while a hen that refused to lay at all might be considered cursed. It was the inspector's job to navigate these tricky waters, ensuring that the villagers understood the difference between a legitimate health concern and a mere case of chicken bad luck. Let's not forget the village meetings where inspectors would present their findings to the villagers. These gatherings, often held in the village square, were a cacophony of clucking and squawking as villagers debated the merits of various coop designs. The inspectors would stand at the front, armed with their clipboard and an unreasonable amount of patience, ready to defend their reports against a barrage of questions and accusations. Why does this coop have a slanted roof? A particularly inquisitive villager might ask. Everyone knows that flat roofs are all the rage for optimal chicken comfort. The inspector would smile, a well-rehearsed expression of calm, and explain the benefits of slanted roofs in preventing water accumulation and ensuring proper drainage. This was often met with eye rolls and mutterings about those fancy inspectors who think they know everything. And let's not forget the gossip that would swirl around these meetings. Nothing got people talking quite like a scandal involving a particularly notorious chicken owner, someone who might have neglected their coop or, heaven forbid, attempted to bribe an inspector. Such stories would travel fast, and the community would come together to both scorn and revel in the misdeeds of their fellow villagers, creating a rich tapestry of intrigue that would make even the most mundane coop inspection seem like the plot of a Shakespearean drama. So, as we peel back the layers of this seemingly monotonous history, it becomes abundantly clear that chicken coop inspections were about more than just ensuring the health of the poultry. They were a microcosm of medieval life, filled with intrigue, miscommunication, and the ever-present threat of legal repercussions for the hapless villagers trying to navigate the complexities of chicken ownership. And who knew that beneath the surface of clucking chickens lay a vast network of rules, regulations, and interpersonal dramas that would make even the most mundane office politics look like child's play. It's a testament to the sheer absurdity of human civilization, a civilization that, while seemingly fixated on the chaotic nature of its chickens, ultimately paved the way for the organized poultry operations we have today. So the next time you're in a supermarket, casually picking out a dozen eggs, remember the painstaking history that brought those eggs from medieval coops to your breakfast table. Behind every shell lies a tale of inspections, fines, and a whole lot of boredom that has shaped the world of poultry farming. It's a story of dedication, bureaucracy, and above all, an endless parade of chickens, each with their own bureaucratic saga waiting to be retrieved from the annals of history. As we plunge deeper into the quagmire of medieval chicken coop inspection procedures, we must first delve into the rather unremarkable yet crucial inventory procedures that were the backbone of any self-respecting chicken enterprise. It's astonishing to think that these villages, often teetering on the brink of subsistence, would devote an inordinate amount of time to the meticulous counting, cataloging, and recording of their poultry assets. Imagine a farmer, weary from a long day of plowing fields, surrounded by clucking hens, scratching away on parchment with a quill, an image that beautifully encapsulates the tediousness of medieval life. First, let's talk about the inventory itself. Villagers were required to maintain a detailed log of each chicken owned, often referred to as the hen ledger of ownership, not to be confused with the less glamorous egg inventory, which was a whole different kettle of fish, or fowl, if you will. This log included the chicken's name, age, color, and any relevant distinguishing features. Yes, you heard that right. Some villagers had the audacity to name their chickens. Such creativity would be met with smug disdain from neighboring farmers, who believed that naming a chicken was a slippery slope toward emotional attachment and ultimately poor poultry management. Now, one might ask, why on earth did they care so much? Well, the answer lies in the fines that awaited those who failed to keep up with their inventories. Fines could range from a few pence to an entire chicken, which was no small sum in a time when a chicken could mean the difference between a hearty meal and a meager soup of water and disappointment. Imagine, if you will, the dread of a villager waking up on inspection day, only to realize that they had forgotten to record the birth of a new chick. The anxiety must have been palpable. They would have to endure the judgmental gaze of the local inspector, who was probably more concerned about the integrity of the henhouse than the integrity of the villagers themselves. Speaking of inspectors, let's not overlook the bureaucratic rules surrounding their appointment. In many villages, the role of the chicken inspector was not merely a job, but a position laden with political implications. Often, the inspector was a local noble's crony, or a well-connected merchant who had somehow managed to curry favor with the powers that be. A position procured through dubious means, it was not uncommon for the inspector to arrive with a distinct air of self-importance, brandishing a clipboard, or whatever passed for one back then, and a set of standards that could rival the most complex of tax codes. The inspection process itself was as exciting as watching paint dry, a veritable snooze fest of regulations and assessments. An inspector would arrive, armed with a variety of tools, which often included a measuring stick, a pair of scales, and an assortment of charts that laid out the ideal coop dimensions. You can just imagine the inspector, with a furrowed brow, measuring the height of a chicken coop while muttering about proper air circulation and sufficient nesting space. All the while, the villagers stood by, praying that their coops didn't fall short of the standards set by some long-forgotten council of poultry experts. Oh, and let's talk about material costs for a moment. Building a chicken coop in medieval times was an exercise in budgeting that would make today's financial analysts weep. Boy, construction materials varied widely. But let's be real. Most medieval villages had to make do with whatever was lying around. Wood was a popular choice, often sourced from the nearest forest, assuming the local lord hadn't decided to turn it into a hunting ground. Thatch, straw, and even mud were frequent components in coop architecture, as the unyielding quest for an affordable yet functional henhouse continued. But don't be fooled. While the materials might have been inexpensive, the labor required to assemble these coops was anything but trivial. Villagers often spent their weekends constructing and repairing their coops, grumbling about the price of nails and the difficulty of getting wood that was straight enough to keep the chickens from becoming unintentional escape artists. One must remember that a chicken's natural instinct is to flee at the slightest hint of danger, which made coop construction a delicate balancing act between adequate security and utter stupidity. Once the coop was constructed, the real fun began. The inspections. Each inspector had a unique approach, but most followed a similar pattern of thoroughness that would make any modern-day bureaucrat proud. First, they would conduct a visual inspection, which could last anywhere from 15 minutes to an eternity, depending on how much the inspector enjoyed watching chickens peck at the ground. While some inspectors were known for their leniency, others wielded their power like a sword, ready to strike down any coop that didn't meet their stringent criteria. If a coop passed the inspection, the villagers would receive a certificate, a glorified piece of parchment stating that their chickens were healthy and their coops were compliant. This certificate was not merely a trophy to flaunt in front of neighbors. It was a ticket to peace of mind, and more importantly, a safeguard against fines. However, if the coop was deemed unfit, the consequences were dire. The owner could face fines, a public shaming, or worse, the dreaded chicken confiscation, which was essentially the medieval version of losing a pet. You might be wondering how these inspections affected the chickens themselves. Did they understand the stakes involved? Were they aware that their very existence hinged on the whims of a man with a clipboard? The historical record is, alas, silent on the matter, but one can only imagine the existential crises faced by these poor creatures as they clucked away, blissfully unaware of the chaos surrounding their coop. As the inspections continued year after year, a peculiar culture emerged among the villagers. They began to share tips and tricks for ensuring that their coops met the ever-evolving standards. A sprinkle of straw here, a coat of mud there, they'd say, all while eyeing their neighbor's coop with a mix of envy and disdain. This camaraderie of chicken owners led to the infamous Coop Social, an event that, believe it or not, was a highlight of the village calendar. As dull as it sounds, villagers gathered to discuss Coop strategies, share their most ridiculous inspection stories, and occasionally engage in a spirited debate about the merits of various chicken breeds. I see. The outcome was a collective obsession with chicken coop perfection that bordered on the absurd. The villagers found themselves trapped in a cycle of coop upgrades and inspections, all to appease a system that seemed more concerned with petty regulations than with the well-being of the chickens themselves. It was a reality that would leave any modern-day chicken enthusiast scratching their head in disbelief. Ah yes, the irony. The more inspectors scrutinized their coops, the more the villagers felt compelled to make changes, leading to a never-ending spiral of coop improvements that ultimately did nothing to elevate their quality of life. They found themselves embroiled in an exhausting game of chicken, quite literally, where the stakes were high, but the rewards were often merely a clean slate in the eyes of the inspectors. And so, the saga of medieval chicken coop inspection procedures trundles on. A story not merely of poultry, but of human folly, bureaucracy, and the oddities of agricultural life. It's a captivating reminder that even the most mundane aspects of history can reveal a treasure trove of absurdity, one clucking chicken at a time. So, as you ponder the intricate history behind your next omelet, take a moment to appreciate the tightly woven fabric of regulations and inspections that brought those eggs to your breakfast table. After all, every delicious bite has a story, one that might just leave you feeling a little more grateful and a lot less bored. As we delve deeper into the poultry-centric world of medieval village life, let us turn our attention to the riveting details of chicken coop inventory procedures. Yes, that's right. Nothing quite gets the blood pumping like a good inventory management system for domestic fowl. In an age where spreadsheets were mere figments of a distant future, and calculators were yet to be invented, villagers relied on their keen memories and a healthy dose of finger counting. It was a delicate art, one that involved the utmost precision and a pinch of superstition. Each spring, just as the thaw began to tease the ground, village inspectors would embark on their annual inventory tour. This was not just any stroll through the village. It was a meticulously scheduled event that had the villagers quaking in their clogs. Armed with a notepad made from the finest parchment, or perhaps some recycled animal skin, the inspector would methodically count the chickens, checking off each clucking creature with the enthusiasm usually reserved for a lottery win. Bamanea. And what a thrilling affair it was. Imagine the joy of watching an inspector squint at a chicken, as if it was the most perplexing puzzle he'd ever encountered. Were there enough hens to meet the village's egg quota? Were the roosters properly preening for their duties? It was a nail-biting countdown that could lead to the most absurd penalties. If a villager were found to be one hen short, they faced the ignominy of being publicly scolded, perhaps even fined a meager sum of 1 shilling, a small price to pay for the honor of not being deemed a chicken slacker. But counting chickens was merely the tip of the iceberg. Next came the arduous task of assessing the coop materials. Yes, the material costs. This was where the riveting world of medieval economics truly came into play. Coops were often constructed from a hodgepodge of materials, ranging from the ever-reliable wood to the more exotic thatch. Each material had its own set of pros and cons, and villagers debated these endlessly, as if discussing which flavor of porridge was superior. For the ambitious middle-class farmer, splurging on quality cedar wood could mean the difference between a sturdy coop and one that would collapse under the weight of a particularly ambitious hen. But alas, cedar was expensive. In the harsh marketplace, a single plank of cedar could cost upwards of 2 pence, a small fortune when you considered that a loaf of bread was roughly half that price. Thus, many villagers opted for the cheaper options: old crates, discarded barrels, and whatever scrap they could find lying around. It was a fantastic game of, let's see how much junk we can stack together before it topples over, and the results were often as laughable as they were precarious. Now, you might think that with all this inspection and inventory taking, there would be a clear set of bureaucratic rules governing the chicken coop landscape. Oh, but you would be sorely mistaken. The rules were a tangled web of local customs and half-remembered decrees that had been passed down through generations. There were no standardized inspection checklists, oh no. Instead, each village had its own unique checklist, often influenced by the whims of the current inspector or the prevailing village gossip. For instance, one village might prioritize ventilation, declaring that any coop lacking a minimum of 3 strategically placed holes was subject to immediate fines, while another village's inspectors could find themselves obsessing over the aesthetics of the coop's exterior, because heaven forbid a coop be unsightly. Can you imagine the scandal of having an unsightly chicken abode? The horror! Within this bureaucratic circus, inspectors developed a method of rating coops that was as subjective as it was nonsensical. Some employed a unique point system that assigned values to various coop features. A solid roof might earn you 5 points, while a properly aligned nesting box could reel in a whole 3 points. But woe betide the farmer whose coop was found lacking in both categories. They could lose points faster than a chicken could peck at a grain of corn. It was a chaotic blend of poultry management and subjective judgment, an exquisite dance of incompetence that would make modern bureaucracies weep with envy. Let's not overlook the role of documentation in this riveting saga. Yes, each inspection led to an avalanche of paperwork that would make even the most dedicated medieval scribe recoil in horror. After each inspection, the inspector would scribble down the results, often in a handwriting that could only be described as medieval hieroglyphics. Copies of these inspection reports would then be distributed to village leaders, who would hang them on the quarry walls of the town hall for all to see, as a kind of warning or perhaps a trophy to those who had successfully passed the inspection. But what if you had a complaint? What if, perchance, the inspector was feeling a bit too generous with their point deductions? Well, fear not, for there was a formal complaint process in place, which was as convoluted as you might expect. Complaints needed to be submitted in triplicate to ensure a proper audit trail. You could spend weeks crafting the perfect complaint letter detailing your grievances about the inspector's overly harsh judgment on your Coop's nesting boxes, only to find that the complaint was lost in a sea of other complaints, or perhaps a chicken's nest, as was often the case. And let us not forget the financial aspect of these inspections. The cost of maintaining a compliant coop could quickly escalate. Between materials, labor, and the occasional bribe. Yes, even in medieval times, a little grease on the wheels could smooth things over. Villagers sometimes found their budgets stretched thinner than a hen's patience during molting season. Oh, aye. Now, let's talk about the chickens themselves. Our feathered friends were often the least of the village's concerns, but were an essential cog in this bureaucratic machine. Depending on the quality of the coop and the attentiveness of the owner, chickens could produce anywhere from a dozen eggs a week to a paltry few. The pressure to produce was immense, and the villagers often found themselves in a state of existential dread over their hens' egg-laying habits. What if a hen laid only soft-shelled eggs? What a scandal that would be. It could lead to a loss of points in the inspection process, and possibly an even harsher fine. Thus, it became common practice to offer the chickens a variety of enticing treats to coax them into laying their best. Corn, crushed oyster shells, and even the occasional leftover scraps from the table were all fair game. Villagers soon became amateur chicken nutritionists, poring over ancient agricultural texts to determine the best diet for maximum egg production. So here we are, in the thick of medieval village life, where the mundane and the absurd intertwine in a delightful mess of chicken coop inspection. The villagers, caught in this bizarre cycle of compliance and creativity, were left to navigate the labyrinth of regulations, while their chickens clucked away in their coops, blissfully unaware of the bureaucratic drama unfolding around. As our story unfolds, it becomes clear that the history of medieval village chicken coop inspection procedures is not merely a tale of hens and their homes. It is a timeless reflection of human nature, of our penchant for regulation in the most trivial of matters, and of our bizarre ability to create intricate systems out of the simplest aspects of life. The next time you crack open an egg, remember the villagers who toiled under the weight of their own absurdity, and perhaps take a moment to appreciate the rich tapestry of history that led to your breakfast. After all, it's not just an omelet. It's a plate full of medieval nonsense served with a side of irony. As we delve deeper into the world of medieval chicken coop inspections, we must first explore the intricate inventory procedures that the village inspectors employed with the fervor of a modern-day accountant preparing for a corporate audit. Yes, dear viewers, while you might imagine these inspectors to be rugged farmers with straw hats and an affinity for rustic charm, the reality was that they were more akin to overzealous clerks, armed with quills and parchment, ready to document every squawk and feather. To kick off the inspection process, each villager was required to prepare a detailed inventory of their fowl. This was no simple task. A typical inventory would include the number of chickens, their breeds, age, and believe it or not, their individual personalities. Yes, if your hen was particularly feisty or had a penchant for drama, you were expected to note that down. Cluckingham the Brave, perhaps? Or Lady Featherbottom the Sassy? Heaven forbid a villager would misclassify their chickens as mere egg layers when they were, in fact, highly regarded members of the community with distinct temperaments. The inspectors had a reputation for being merciless in their scrutiny. so villagers quickly learned to embrace their inner poultry psychologists. Once the inventory was complete, it was time for the actual inspection. Imagine a line of villagers standing nervously outside their coops, clutching their meticulously crafted records, while the inspector, dressed in a robe that seemed to scream, "I take this very seriously," approached with an air of authority that could rival authority that could rival authority. Medieval king. The villagers would watch, hearts racing, as the inspector began to scrutinize not only the condition of the coop, but also the validity of the records presented to them. If a chicken was missing from the inventory, and let's be honest, with all the chaos of daily life, which chicken owner could keep track of every feathered friend, it could mean a hefty fine or, worse, a stern reprimand. Hey! The fine for discrepancies in records was famously punitive. In fact, some villages had a whole system of penalties that made the local lord's tax codes seem like child's play. A miscounted chicken that would set you back a whole basket of apples, and not just any apples, mind you, but the prized ones from the king's own orchard. And don't even think about trying to pull a fast one. Rumors circulated that some inspectors had been known to employ a rather aggressive chicken count method. What that entailed was a vigorous shaking of the coop while demanding, "What do you mean you only have 5 hens? Where's the 6th?" Unsurprisingly, few dared to test this method's efficacy or the inspector's patience. As the inspections progressed, one could hardly overlook the material costs associated with maintaining a compliant chicken coop. But imagine the villagers faced with the dual burdens of keeping their chickens comfortable and their coops up to code. The ideal coop structure was a complex affair that would put contemporary architects to shame. It needed to be built from specific materials, wood, preferably oak or ash, as pine was often deemed too flimsy for proper fowl housing. Not to mention, the thatched roof had to be waterproof. Otherwise, you risked a soggy chicken. Soggy chickens, you see, led to disgruntled inspectors, and, subsequently, a stream of paperwork that made even the most seasoned clerk wish for a simpler life. Some daring villagers even experimented with alternative materials in a bid to wow the inspectors. One particularly bold resident attempted to create a coop using mud bricks, claiming that it would provide optimal insulation for the chickens. The inspector, upon seeing this mud monstrosity, reportedly declared it a disgrace to poultry architecture, and the villager was left to ponder his life choices while digging a new foundation out of the very same mud. Now, in addition to the structure itself, coop decor was a surprisingly significant aspect of the inspection process. Villagers were often encouraged to adorn their coops with charming decorations. Think hand-painted signs declaring, "Welcome to Hen Heaven" or "Cluckingham Palace," which of course were required for aesthetic appeal. The inspectors could be swayed by such frivolities, as they carried with them a flair for the dramatic. More often than not, a well-decorated coop would earn a bonus point or two on the inspection rubric, while a bare-bones facility was sure to warrant a stern look and a disapproving cluck from the inspector. Another layer of complexity in this bureaucratic quagmire was the need for proper bedding material. Straw was the gold standard, but not just any straw would do. It had to be freshly harvested, dry, and free of pests, a nearly impossible feat considering the village's proximity to the local rat population. So, what did clever villagers do? They formed straw cooperatives, of course. These cooperatives would buy in bulk, ensuring that every villager had access to the finest straw, which not only kept the chickens happy but also provided the coop inspectors with something to admire during their visits. Now, if you thought keeping the chickens fed and their living conditions up to snuff was enough, think again. The regulations also included a comprehensive feeding schedule for each hen, with mandated quantities of grain per day. The inspectors had a keen eye for detail, and any shortage could result in a serious citation. Picture a group of villagers huddled together, whispering in hushed tones about the latest grain prices in the market, all while keeping one ear tuned to the sound of the inspector's approach. The tension was palpable. Who would dare to skimp on chicken feed when the wrath of the inspection loomed like an ominous cloud? Yeah. To add a cherry on top of this absurd cake of regulations, there was the infamous Chicken Welfare Report. This document required the villagers to write monthly reflections on their chickens' health and happiness. Yes, you heard that right. Villagers were expected to pen heartfelt accounts detailing their chickens' moods, any unusual behaviors, and even their social interactions, all under the watchful eye of the village inspector, who had the uncanny ability to sniff out insincerity from a mile away. Imagine the scene. A villager furiously scribbling away, trying to find the right words to convey that Henrietta the hen was in a state of existential crisis because she lost a feather. The pressure was so intense that many resorted to poetic musings, leading to the creation of the world's first chicken-themed sonnets, which, while charming, did little to alleviate the stress of compliance. No, why nay. All of this, dear viewers, was layered atop the administrative nightmare that was the village council meetings. These gatherings were rife with debates over the latest inspection protocols, often degenerating into heated arguments over the merits of straw versus hay, or the implications of adding a decorative wind chime to the coop entrance. The village scribe, tasked with documenting these sessions, must have had the time of their life trying to keep up with the shenanigans. And we mustn't forget the village's annual Best Coop competition, a veritable Olympics of chicken coops, where the true artistry of poultry architecture was put on display. Villagers would go to great lengths, spending months in preparation, crafting intricate designs, and ensuring every detail was in place, from the structural integrity to the aesthetic charm. The winning coop would be celebrated in song and dance, while the losers would be left to contemplate their lackluster efforts, perhaps vowing to improve for next year, thus perpetuating the cycle of coop obsession. As we continue to unravel this historical tapestry, we see that the medieval chicken coop inspection procedures serve as a microcosm of society's relationship with bureaucracy. From the absurdity of inventory lists to the agonizing details of compliance, it's clear that even the simplest of tasks can spiral into an epic saga of confusion and regulation. So, the next time you take a moment to admire your local chicken coop, or even just enjoy a lovely omelet, remember the villagers who once stood under the relentless scrutiny of the inspectors, their feathery friends providing the backdrop to a drama that would make even Shakespeare raise an eyebrow. It's a reminder that in the grand scheme of history, the most mundane aspects of life can lead to the most extraordinary tales. As we delve deeper into the quagmire of medieval chicken coop inspection procedures, we find ourselves entangled in an intricate web of inventory protocols that would make any modern-day accountant weep. Imagine, if you will, the hapless village clerk, quill in hand, meticulously tallying the number of roosting perches, nesting boxes, and of course the ever-elusive pecking order of the feathered inhabitants. Yes, dear viewers, this was not just a casual glance at one's poultry. It was a full-blown examination that could rival the exhaustive scrutiny of a federal audit. Now, let's discuss the clipboard of doom, the famous Coop inventory list. This was not your average grocery list scribbled on the back of a parchment scrap. Oh no. This was a formal document, complete with a header that read, "Inventory of fowl accessories, and potentially infuriating regulations." The list included items such as number of hens, number of roosters, and average pecking efficiency, a metric that some villagers swore could predict the success of the harvest. One could only imagine the conversations that erupted around the village bonfire, as villagers debated the merits of a solid pecking strategy. But why, you may ask? Was it essential to conduct such an exhaustive inventory? The answer is simple: taxes. Yes, even in the idyllic world of medieval farming, the specter of taxation loomed large. If a villager could not prove the existence of their chickens through a detailed cross-referenced list, they risked incurring the wrath of the local lord, who, armed with a ferocious appetite for tax revenue, would swoop in like a hawk. Villagers would find themselves facing the dreaded foul tax, a financial burden that hung over them like a dark cloud. And God forbid if someone attempted to trim the flock without proper documentation. The inspectors had an alarming tendency to carry around small wooden staffs for swatting away any notions of fraud. The material costs associated with maintaining the esteemed chicken coop were another source of angst. A typical coop, built from locally sourced materials, would require a mix of wood, straw, and nails. Lots and lots of nails, which were, let's be real, the unsung heroes of medieval construction. A single coop could easily cost an entire month's wages, which drove many villagers to barter for supplies. So, one could find farmers negotiating with blacksmiths over the price of nails while trying to convince them that last year's chicken feed was a fair trade for a few extra hammers. Perhaps the blacksmith had his eye on a particularly fine hen, and negotiations could devolve into a bizarre auction where the fate of the coop hung in the balance. And we can't overlook the importance of the materials used in constructing these coops. Depending on local customs and the ever-changing whims of the weather, the coop could be adorned with elaborate designs crafted from the finest oak, or simply slapped together with whatever happened to be lying around. Some coops were so poorly constructed that the chickens, with their innate sense of drama, would often stage grand escapes, leading to epic chases that would have made for thrilling tales around the tavern. Villagers would regale one another with stories of the Great Hen escape of 1347, where a particularly clever chicken named Lady Cluckington managed to evade capture for a record-breaking 3 days. Next, we must address the bureaucratic rules that govern the inspectors themselves. The title of Chicken Coop Inspector was not one to be taken lightly. These individuals were often appointed for life, an eternity spent examining coops and scrutinizing the state of poultry affairs. Inspections typically occurred in the early morning, when the sun barely peeked over the horizon, and the chickens were still caught in the bizarre state between sleep and breakfast. This was also when the inspectors were at their most cantankerous, having likely skipped breakfast in favor of a pre-inspection pep talk about the importance of thoroughness. Nay, or well, how the inspectors, clad in their official garb, usually a blend of wool and regret, would arrive with their own set of rules and regulations, which were often more intricate than the designs of the coops themselves. They were armed with an array of tools: measuring sticks for checking the height of nesting boxes, scales for weighing the chickens. Yes, even the chickens had a weight class, and a magnifying glass for examining the feathers. God forbid a chicken was discovered to have a broken feather. That could lead to a serious demerit on the inspector's report. To say that these inspections were rigorous would be an understatement. They began with the infamous pre-inspection questionnaire, which was a series of questions that often felt more invasive than a medieval inquisition. How many eggs did you harvest last week? Have you seen any signs of poultry illness? And the ever-important, do you have your poultry documentation in order? Were just a few of the queries that could set a villager's heart racing. How? Hamas. Failing to live up to the inspector's lofty standards could result in severe penalties. A poorly maintained coop might lead to a fine, or, worse yet, the dreaded foul reprimand, a mark against a villager's name that would follow them through the annals of history like a dark stain. Imagine the shame of being that one villager who couldn't keep their chickens in line. The gossip at the market would be relentless, with other villagers whispering behind hands while their chickens cackled in agreement. Did you hear about Ethel? Hope's in shambles. Her hens are practically squawking rebellion. And then there were the infamous post-inspection reports, which were essentially the medieval equivalent of a Yelp review, but with far less flair and considerably more ink spilled in frustration. Inspectors would document every tiny infraction, from the placement of the coop to the exact number of pecking order disputes. These reports could be lengthy, often resembling epic tomes detailing the tragic flaws of various coops. The only thing more tedious than reading these reports was writing them, as inspectors would often find themselves mired in existential crises over the fate of a chicken coop that had merely been built 3 inches too short. Nay, in a society that thrived on order and reputation, the stakes were painfully high. A well-maintained coop could elevate a villager's status, leading to better social standing, more chickens, and perhaps an even fancier coop in the next competition. Conversely, a poorly managed coop could lead to ostracization, the loss of livestock, and a lifetime of being that person who once had chickens but just couldn't keep them together. So, as we explore the exasperating history of medieval village chicken coop inspection procedures, let us not forget the sheer absurdity woven into the fabric of everyday life. The next time you casually toss a few breadcrumbs to your backyard chickens or purchase a dozen organic eggs at the market, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of those who once stood in the shadows of their coops, armed with inventory lists and facing the relentless gaze of inspectors. What a world indeed. The medieval village chicken coop inspection procedures were less about the actual chickens and more about the intricate dance of bureaucracy, social dynamics, and the ever-looming threat of ridicule. Imagine, if you will, a damp morning in a small English village where the scent of freshly turned earth mingles with the faintest whiff of regret. As the rooster crows, because of course one must have a rooster, the inspectors begin their rounds. Their clipboards, fashioned from the finest scrap wood available, which is to say not very fine at all, are filled with the minutiae of chicken coop requirements. First and foremost on the inspector's list was the inventory of chickens. Oh yes, the chickens. The pride and joy of many a peasant, and the fuel for endless gossip. The inventory procedure might seem straightforward. Count the chickens, jot down their colors, and note any peculiarities, like a chicken with a questionable attitude, or one that seemed to think it was a duck. But this was medieval England, where even the simplest tasks morphed into elaborate rituals. Inspectors were required to ensure that each chicken had a specific number of feathers, a standard that had been set by the Royal Chicken Inspection Guild. If a chicken was found to be a feather short, the owner could face a penalty so severe it might involve the public shaming of their coop through, you guessed it, more inspections. Material costs for constructing these coops were a source of endless debate. Villagers would frequently argue about the merits of thatch versus wattle, with the former being more fashionable, but the latter more practical. The cost of lumber alone could drive a person mad, especially when one considered that most trees were not just standing there waiting to be lumbered, but were rather busy being a part of the ecosystem. Villagers often had to resort to bartering. I'll trade you 2 chickens for enough wood to build a coop, but only if you throw in a handful of nails, they would declare, with the same gravity as one might negotiate a peace treaty. Nails, you might wonder. Ah, yes, the ubiquitous nails. They were a precious commodity, not unlike gold, and came with a hefty price tag. The medieval blacksmith, an underappreciated artisan of the time, often found himself at the center of this chicken coop economy, hammering away at iron in the glow of his forge, while villagers clamored for his wares. A dozen nails for a chicken? What sort of chicken are we talking about? Was a common refrain, often punctuated by a haughty sniff from the smith, who knew full well that a good chicken was worth at least 24 nails, especially if it was a broody hen. Winger. And how? Now, let's talk about the rules, those exasperating, soul-crushing rules that governed every aspect of coop inspections. For instance, the proper height rule dictated that a chicken coop should be no less than 4 feet and no more than 6 feet tall. Any coop that dared to sidestep this regulation was clearly a blight on society and considered an affront to the very idea of poultry. "How dare you provide your fowl with such insufficient ceiling height?" would be heard echoing through the village as inspectors waved their scrolls of regulations like swords in a jousting match. Bah. Notably, the ventilation clause was yet another mind-numbingly specific requirement. Each coop was required to have no fewer than 3 strategically placed vents, which must be elevated at least 15 inches off the ground. Why 15 inches? No one seemed to remember, but it had been decreed by a long-forgotten council of village elders who probably didn't have enough chickens to warrant the ruling. If an inspector found a coop lacking in ventilation, they would wag their finger disapprovingly, marking it down as a breeding ground for disease, a term that struck terror into the hearts of coop owners who imagined their chickens falling ill from a lackness of fresh air. And let's not overlook the chicken's comfort report. Yes, you heard that right. Inspectors were required to evaluate the comfort level of each chicken. This meant assessing the bedding material, which had to be nothing less than the finest straw, sourced from the local mill, assuming, of course, that the miller wasn't having a particularly bad day and decided to charge an arm and a leg for a handful of straw. If the bedding was deemed subpar, the inspector would frown gravely and scribble down insufficient bedding in their notes, leading to a summons for the owner to appear before the village council. The horror! In addition to the chickens themselves, the coop's surroundings underwent rigorous scrutiny. Inspectors would study the area around the coop, ensuring there were no signs of vermin, because nothing says successful chicken farming like a rat problem. If a rat was spotted, the owner could find themselves in a world of trouble, forced to defend their honor against accusations of negligent husbandry. Who knew that chicken farming could lead to courtroom drama? But it didn't stop there. The inspectors also measured the distance between the coop and the nearest water source. This was the hydration distance regulation, which mandated that all coops be located no less than 10 paces from a water source, a rule that had been enacted after a particularly disastrous incident involving a drunken villager who accidentally knocked over a barrel of ale and flooded an entire chicken coop. The ensuing chaos was something of legend, with chickens flapping and squawking in a state of utter confusion. Let's not forget about the paperwork. Oh, the paperwork. After every inspection, the inspector would return to their office, a rickety shack with more holes than walls, where they would file the reports into an endless sea of scrolls and parchment. Each inspection generated a tome of paperwork, meticulously crafted with ink that was, more often than not, a tad too watery for its own good. This led to the practice of ink rationing, where inspectors would argue vehemently over who had the right to use the last drops of ink, leading to inevitable brawls over a small inkwell. After a long day of inspecting coops, villagers would gather in the tavern, recounting tales of their inspections with the fervor of knights returning from battle. You should have seen the inspector's face when he found my coop was just a tad too short. One villager would boast, while another desperately tried to one-up them with the story of a chicken that had managed to escape during inspection and wreak havoc in the village square. The laughter would roll through the tavern like a wave, a comforting reminder that in their small corner of the world, absurdity reigned supreme. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, the inspectors would return home, their heads filled with the day's absurdities. They might have dreamt of chickens, coops, and the endless march of inspections, but deep down, they knew that every chicken counted, not just for the eggs they produced, but for the tales they inspired. The tales of medieval life that would echo through It was alright. Ages, forever reminding us of the exasperating, laughable complexity of something as simple as a chicken coop. Ew. Ow. As the villagers settled into their evening routines, recounting the day's escapades in the comfort of their thatched homes, far away, in the dimly lit chambers of the local lord's castle, the true weight of chicken coop inspection procedures was being pondered. Yes, dear viewers. It was not just the inspectors who bore the burden of these feathered regulations. Even the lords found themselves mired in the vast swamp of bureaucracy that was medieval governance. Picture, if you will, a damp parchment, yellowed with age and inked with the meticulous yet exasperatingly verbose scribblings of a long-forgotten clerk. This was no ordinary document, mind you. It was the official treatise on the standards and procedures for the inspection of chicken coops. A title so thrilling, it could make even the most ardent chicken enthusiast doze off mid-cackle. Within its pages lay a labyrinth of rules, regulations, and utterly pointless minutiae, all laid out in a fashion that could confuse even the sharpest-witted villager. Let's dive deeper, shall we? The first section, titled Dimensions of the Coop, made it abundantly clear that a coop should not be less than 6 feet in height and 8 feet in length. Why such specific measurements, you might ask? Well, it turns out that medieval chickens had a penchant for claustrophobia. The last thing you wanted was a coop full of chickens spiraling into a panic, flapping their wings like tiny, feathery tornadoes. But of course, if you happen to live in a particularly hilly area, you could be granted an exemption, provided you submitted the correct forms that included a minutely detailed topographical map of your land. Yes, you heard that right. A topographical map just so your chickens could enjoy a bit of vertical freedom. Next came the section on materials approved for coop construction. This part read like a medieval Home Depot inventory list, with an impressive array of options: oak wood, cedar, and if you were particularly daring, even some locally sourced straw bales. However, woe betide the villager who thought to throw a splash of creativity into their coop tent. The regulations specified that any coop built with unapproved materials, which, for the record, included anything from mud to old horse saddles, would be summarily condemned. The tragic fate of one hapless farmer, whose coop was constructed from repurposed castle stones, became a cautionary tale, complete with its own ballad sung in taverns for generations. Then we have the inventory procedures. Oh, the sheer joy of inventory. This section mandated that each inspector would be required to count not just the chickens, but also the nesting boxes, feed supplies, and the ever-necessary perch height. Yes, perch height. Because heaven forbid a chicken find itself perched at an improper elevation. You might think that counting chickens sounds simple enough, but in practice, it was a bureaucratic nightmare. Each inspector had to carry a small abacus made from the finest peasant-crafted wood, because, clearly, a simple tally wouldn't do. The idea was that the abacus would help inspectors keep an accurate count. In reality, it only resulted in an endless cycle of miscounting, squawking, and the occasional bout of chicken-induced hysteria. And who could forget the costs associated with this elaborate charade? The villagers were burdened with not only the construction of their coops, but also the fees associated with inspections. The cost of a chicken coop inspection could rival that of a small goat. Villagers would gather in hushed circles, whispering about the exorbitant taxes that had to be paid to the lord, which included a chicken tax based on the number of hens in one's possession. It was a cruel twist of fate that those who sought to raise chickens for a bountiful egg supply were also the ones forced to pay for the privilege. The inspectors, meanwhile, were not without their own financial tribulations. They received a meager stipend that barely covered their travel expenses, let alone the fine wines they had grown accustomed to during their long days in the field. Thus, some inspectors resorted to creative accounting, often finding themselves embroiled in scandals involving bribes of fresh eggs, or in some cases, baked goods that had gone awry. The villagers had developed a keen understanding of the inspector's weaknesses, and as such, a well-placed pie on the inspection day often ensured a smoother process. Let's not overlook the inspection day protocol, a series of bureaucratic rituals that would have made even the most devout followers of the medieval church roll their eyes. The day began with the ceremonial gathering of inspectors, often accompanied by trumpets that played the most painfully uninspired fanfare you could imagine. The villagers were required to present their coops in the morning light, preferably with the sun rising just so, to avoid casting shadows that could be interpreted as ill omens. The inspectors would then don their official inspection robes, which, let's face it, looked more like oversized potato sacks than the garb of dignitaries. Upon arrival at the coop, the inspector would begin with a thorough examination of the coop's exterior, measuring, poking, and prodding like a medieval doctor with a questionable bedside manner. The villagers, meanwhile, would stand by, nervously eyeing their chickens, praying that none would attempt an escape. If a chicken did manage to slip past an inspector, it would surely lead to a series of events that could only be described as chaos incarnate. The poor inspector, now scrambling to retrieve the fugitive fowl, would inadvertently cause a scene that left the villagers howling with laughter. And just when you thought the absurdity couldn't escalate further, we enter the documentation phase. After the inspection, each inspector was required to fill out a detailed report outlining their findings. This report was not only a reflection of the coop's condition, but also an opportunity for inspectors to express their artistic flair, or lack thereof. With quills dipped in the finest ink, they would craft elaborate narratives about the state of the chickens, including their temperament, egg-laying habits, and even the occasional gossip about the neighbors' farming practices. The reports could spiral into lengthy essays, adorned with alliteration and metaphor, creating a veritable tapestry of chicken-related prose that would make even the most ardent literary enthusiast weep. Once the documentation was complete, it would be delivered to the Lord's castle, where it would be stored in a dusty chamber filled with more scrolls than any sane person could count. Here, the fate of each coop would be decided, not by the state of the chickens or the quality of the coop, but rather by the whims of the Lord, who, after all, had more pressing matters to attend to, like deciding whether to launch a campaign against the neighboring lord or simply take an afternoon nap. As twilight descended upon the village, with the stars twinkling like the eyes of long-forgotten chickens, the villagers would gather once more, sharing tales of the day's absurdities over flagons of ale. With each story, the legacy of the chicken coop inspections grew, weaving a rich tapestry of humor and exasperation that would be passed down through generations. It was a reminder that in the grand scheme of medieval life, where honor and valor often defined one's worth, there was something profoundly human about the laughter that arose from the utterly mundane. For while the lords quarreled over land and titles, and knights battled for glory, it was in the humble chicken coop, amid the absurdities of inspection and regulation, that the true spirit of village life thrived. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is a lesson worth clucking about. Nianu, I say, until we ascend. As the evening wore on, and the last remnants of daylight faded like a forgotten memory, the villagers began to reflect on the intricate web of bureaucratic nonsense that surrounded their beloved chickens. Yes, dear viewer, we are about to dive headfirst into the delightfully boring world of chicken coop inventory procedures, a saga that would make even the most fervent enthusiast of medieval history yawn uncontrollably. First and foremost, let us discuss the very act of conducting a chicken inventory. Imagine a sunny day in the village, birds chirping, the scent of freshly baked bread wafting through the air, and a group of farmers squabbling over the proper methodology for counting their fowl. Yes, on this otherwise idyllic day, villagers were called to gather not for a feast, but to engage in the monotonous task of counting chickens. This system, devised by someone with far too much time on their hands and a peculiar fondness for bureaucracy, became known as the Poultry Enumeration Protocol. This protocol detailed the exact number of feathers, beaks, and even the average weight of each hen, because evidently every ounce mattered in the grand scheme of the village economy. Now, before you dismiss this as mere triviality, consider the implications. The accuracy of these records was paramount, not just for the sake of order, but for taxation purposes. Yes, taxes, the bane of every peasant's existence since the dawn of time. Each chicken was assigned a value based on its size, health, and, oddly enough, personality. Who knew that a particularly feisty hen could lead to a higher tax bracket? Thus, on some days, you might find a farmer fervently arguing with a tax collector over whether or not his hen, Gertrude the Gritty, should be classified as exemplary or merely adequate. Now, let's not forget the paperwork that accompanied this poultry pandemonium. Each chicken inspection came with a ledger, a hefty tome filled with hundreds of pages dedicated to the meticulous documentation of every single coop in the village. This ledger was not just a simple record. It was a bureaucratic behemoth that had to be filled with the precision of a monk copying a sacred text. In fact, some villagers would joke that the only thing more sacred than the word of God was the accurate representation of their chicken inventory. The writing implements were as mundane as they come. Most villagers employed quills fashioned from the very chickens they were inspecting, creating a sort of tragic irony that would have tickled the fancies of philosophers and comedians alike. Imagine a peasant diligently dipping a quill into ink made from crushed berries, all while staring deeply into the eyes of the hen that provided it. Such was the nature of medieval life, where the absurd and the practical collided in a perfectly chaotic harmony. Once the inventory was concluded, and let's be clear, this could take days, if not weeks, depending on how many ale-fueled debates arose. The next hurdle was the approval process. Yes, you heard it right. Approval. A committee of village elders, usually composed of the most cantankerous and nitpicky individuals one could imagine, sat in judgment over the completed inspections. This chicken tribunal was notorious for their draconian measures and penchant for hair-splitting. They would sift through the ledgers with the intensity of a hawk hunting for its next meal, looking for any sign of discrepancy, no matter how minor. Should they discover even a single chicken miscounted, let's say a hen tragically lost to a hungry fox, the farmer would be summoned to defend their honor in front of this esteemed panel. It was a veritable inquisition, but instead of heretics, they were after the culprits of avian misrepresentation. But wait, dear viewers, there's more. After the approval came the even more thrilling phase of material cost evaluation. This was the zenith of excitement, where villagers would gather around a table strewn with parchment and charcoal, calculating the costs of feed, bedding, and basic necessities to ensure their chickens remained healthy and productive. You might be wondering what this entails. It's simply the most riveting of discussions, combining the allure of mathematics with the fragrant aroma of hay and chicken droppings. Feed was often a source of heated debate. The elite among the villagers may have had the luxury of high-quality grains, while others were relegated to scavenging for whatever scraps they could find. Imagine a peasant trying to justify the premium price of organic barley to a council of skeptical farmers who were content with whatever they could pilfer from the local mill. An argument usually punctuated with a fair amount of swearing and accusations of betrayal toward the great hen in the sky. Then there was the bedding material, straw versus Some farmers swore by the comfort of straw, claiming it provided a softer landing for their precious hens, while others staunchly defended the use of hay, citing its superior smell. Both sides would passionately argue their points over pints of ale, each convinced of their bedding's superiority, completely overlooking the fact that, in the end, chickens didn't particularly care as long as they had something to scratch and peck at. Once all these riveting discussions had culminated in the most thrilling of decisions, the villagers would prepare to submit their findings to the Lord of the Land. Yes, the Lord, the overarching figure who probably had better things to do than care about chicken coop inspections, but was nonetheless forced to sign off on the paperwork. Picture him, clad in armor and clutching a goblet of wine, rolling his eyes as yet another peasant presented him with a scroll containing the riveting details of their poultry-related expenditures. One could only imagine what was going through his mind. Perhaps he was dreaming of glorious battles, or contemplating whether it was indeed time for that afternoon nap. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the village, the chickens were finally tucked away for the night. The villagers, exhausted from their day of inspections, inventories, and bureaucratic wrangling, would gather around the fire once more, sharing tales of the day's events, the triumphs, the failures, and the endless bickering over the most minute details of the most minute. Their chickens. And as they laughed, one could almost hear the echoes of history, a gentle reminder that in the grand tapestry of life, it wasn't just the quests for glory or the battles for honor that defined an age. It was also the shared absurdity of counting chickens, one tedious inspection at a time. So, the legacy of the chicken coop inspections continued, one dull regulation at a time, a testament to the resilience of village life. And who would have thought that the fate of a chicken could spark such fervor, such passion, and such utterly pointless debate? Perhaps it is true what they say. The smallest of creatures can sometimes leave the largest of imprints on the pages of history, even if those pages are filled with nothing more than squabbles over straw. Yes, bring on the next inspection, and may the odds be ever in your favor as you navigate the treacherous world of medieval poultry regulations. Ewand Hans. As we delve further into the exasperating world of medieval village chicken coop inspection procedures, it's essential to grasp the sheer banality of what was at stake during these routine checks. Imagine the scene. Dirt paths winding through quaint villages, the clucking of hens barely masking the undercurrent of tension as inspectors arrived with their scrolls, quills, and a sense of purpose so profound it could only be rivaled by a tax collector in search of a wayward penny. Let's first discuss the inventory procedures. Inventory. The bane of every farmer's existence. In the realm of medieval poultry management, meticulous record-keeping was not just encouraged, it was mandated by the local lords, who, as we all know, had nothing better to do than oversee the feathered inhabitants of the realm. Inspections began with the dreaded head count, a process that could take hours if not days, depending on the inspector's attention span and the chicken's willingness to cooperate. Farmers were expected to keep detailed ledgers, documenting every time a chicken laid an egg or even pecked at the ground with the finesse of a nobleman at a banquet. One farmer, known only as Harold the Perpetually Frustrated, found himself at the mercy of these inspections when he accidentally miscounted his flock, leading to a 3-hour debate over the legitimacy of 2 rogue hens who seemed to have decided to explore the neighboring field rather than adhere to the stringent policies of poultry placement. Material costs were another thrilling aspect of chicken coop management. Let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer joy of calculating the cost of straw, wood, nails, and the occasional high-priced chicken feed that could make or break a farmer's yearly budget. Straw, for instance, was a bottomless pit of debate. The quality of straw determined not only the comfort of the chickens, but also their egg-laying productivity. Most farmers swore by the local straw, gathered from the fields after the harvest, claiming it was the only way to ensure happy hens. Others took a more ambitious route, investing in imported straw from neighboring counties, a choice that could lead to ridicule and accusations of pretentiousness, as if one were trying to impress the village with their straw pedigree. Now, the prices fluctuated wildly based on the season and the whims of local merchants. A particularly harsh winter could lead to soaring straw prices, as farmers scrambled to keep their coops warm and cozy, leading to a spike in straw-related bickering among neighboring farms. "I refuse to pay 6 pence for straw that smells like last year's leftovers," one irate farmer would exclaim, waving a pitchfork as if it were a banner of rebellion. But hold on, we haven't even scratched the surface of bureaucratic regulations. The medieval chicken coop inspection was a Byzantine affair riddled with rules, sub-rules, and sub-sub-rules that made the average villager's head spin faster than a chicken on a rotisserie. Inspectors were armed, not just with quills, but with scrolls that detailed a plethora of standards. For instance, under the Great Coop Decree of 1234, a document so dense it could be mistaken for a medieval tome on advanced mathematics, every coop had to adhere to a minimum height requirement of 3 feet to prevent chickens from escaping, and, heaven forbid, engaging in unsanctioned cross-village poultry diplomacy. Then there were the hygiene standards. The hygiene standards. Coops had to pass muster on numerous fronts, including but not limited to the absence of foul odors, a minimal presence of rodents, and the requirement that no chicken be found with visible signs of ailment. This was particularly tricky since the villagers often debated what constituted an ailment. Was a chicken limping due to old age experiencing an ailment, or was it simply a matter of being overworked in the field of clucking? Various factions would gather to discuss this pressing issue, forming committees that could rival any medieval council in terms of their fervor. Once the inspections commenced, things could escalate quickly. The inspector would invariably arrive at the coop with a checklist that felt more like a novel than a mere assessment tool. Each item demanded a response, and if a farmer dared to answer with anything less than absolute adherence to the checklist, the result could be catastrophic. A dreaded notice of non-compliance leading to a potential ban on chicken sales at the local market. If that happened, a farmer could lose the means to buy the very straw they so desperately needed, thus entering a vicious cycle of poultry-related despair. Let's not forget about the infamous chicken communication protocol. Yes, you heard that right. A whole section of the inspection process revolved around how farmers were supposed to communicate with their chickens during inspection. This protocol was designed to ensure that no chicken could claim ignorance of the rules. Farmers were mandated to speak in tones that conveyed authority and calmness, lest the chickens panic and disrupt the otherwise meticulously orchestrated inspection process. "No clucking allowed" was a common refrain heard echoing through the coops. Aye, and as one can imagine, there were always those who pushed the boundaries of these rules. Take, for example, the daring farmer from the village of Cluckington, who once tried to implement a chicken whispering technique, convinced that soothing words would boost egg production. Unfortunately, this experiment ended in utter chaos when the chickens, confused by the philosophical musings of their owner, began laying eggs in places no self-respecting chicken would dare to go, much to the horror of the local inspectors. As if this weren't enough, there were also the penalties for non-compliance, which varied widely depending on the mood of the inspector. A farmer could face anything from a stern talking to, which often sounded like a lecture on the importance of proper chicken care, delivered with all the enthusiasm of a deathbed confession, to fines that could leave them penniless. In the worst-case scenario, a farmer could even be forced to hold a public apology to the chickens, a situation that left many farmers red-faced and chickens clucking, with what can only be described as mild bemusement. Moreover, the role of the inspector was not just that of a bureaucratic enforcer. Some inspectors took it upon themselves to become the self-appointed chicken enthusiasts of the realm, holding court after inspections to discuss the merits of various chicken breeds, egg sizes, and the latest gossip concerning which farmer had the best-looking coop. But this could lead to intense rivalries among villagers, often resulting in elaborate displays of chicken artistry, wherein farmers would dress their hens in finery, akin to that of the nobility, to impress the inspectors and sway their opinions. In short, the entire process morphed into a social event, a yearly ritual where friendships were tested, alliances were forged, and the fate of a farmer's livelihood rested on the whims of an inspector who may or may not have had a good breakfast that morning. The stakes were high, but the drama was palpable and, of course, utterly lacking in any genuine excitement. And so, the next time you find yourself bored to tears by the mundane tasks of everyday life, remember the medieval villagers who braved the trials of chicken coop inspections. They faced their fears, counted their chickens, and navigated the labyrinthine regulations of the poultry world, all in the hopes of ensuring that their coops remained within the good graces of the law. In a time when every detail mattered, it was the little things, like the number of pecked grains on a coop floor, or the alignment of a nesting box, that shaped the very essence of rural existence. And as the sun set over the fields, casting long shadows over the thriving coops, one could almost hear the faint echo of clucking mirroring the laughter of villagers, reminiscing about their inspections, their battles, and their ever-present quest to keep their feathered friends in line. Because in the grand scheme of history, it's not always the valiant knights or the great battles that leave a mark. Sometimes, it's just a bunch of villagers losing their minds over a clutch of eggs. And that, dear viewer, is the absurdity of history at its finest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the villagers and their feathered occupants settled down for the night, snuggling into the comforting embrace of a world governed by coop regulations and a mountain of mundane paperwork. Yes, paperwork. The unsung hero of medieval agriculture. You see, while knights were off questing for glory and dragons, the true battles were being waged in the dimly lit corners of village halls, where the tedious art of inventory procedures unfolded. Eddie. Inventory, my friends, was no mere counting of chickens. Oh no! This was a highly intricate process governed by the whims of local lords and the all-consuming fear of fines. Villagers had to record every single cluck, scratch, and peck in a ledger that could put the most riveting accounting books to sleep. This ledger, often referred to as the Poultry Registry of Prodigious Proportions, a title that sounds more impressive than it actually was, had columns for everything you could possibly think of: chicken types, egg production rates, feed consumption. There was even a section for noting the emotional state of each chicken. Clucky and slightly disgruntled were the preferred descriptors. Let's take a moment to marvel at the sheer complexity of this document. Imagine a farmer, quill in hand, examining his flock with the intensity of a detective on a high-stakes case. Did Henrietta lay today? Was it one egg or two? Was it a double yolk situation? And for the love of all that is good, did she look particularly disgruntled? Each day, this relentless pursuit of detail unfolded like a bad soap opera, where the stakes were nothing less than the health of the entire village's poultry economy. And speaking of economies, we must address the material costs associated with maintaining a chicken coop that adhered to the ever-evolving standards of local authorities. While the average modern-day chicken might find luxury in organic feed and lavish coops, medieval villagers were left to grapple with the fiscal realities of coop upkeep. We're talking about timber, nails, straw, and the occasional rat-proofing measure. Yes, rat-proofing. You see, rats were the true nemesis of the medieval poultry world. They were the phantoms lurking in the shadows, ready to sabotage your carefully curated flock and drain your resources faster than you could say. Coop inspection. Now, let's break down the costs, shall we? A sturdy chicken coop could easily set a villager back several silver coins. Now, that may not sound like much to our modern sensibilities, but in a time when a loaf of bread cost mere pennies, that expenditure was nothing short of a financial commitment that could lead to sleepless nights, much like our modern credit card bills. And let's not forget about the cost of feed. Grain prices fluctuated like the unpredictable whims of a feudal lord, sometimes soaring to astronomical heights. A villager might find themselves in a predicament, debating between feeding their chickens or their children. Spoiler alert, the chickens often won. After all, you can't have a thriving poultry operation without a few sacrifices. Ooh. Now, let's pivot back to our favorite bureaucratic pastime, the rules and regulations governing chicken coop inspections. Each village had its own set of guidelines, often scribbled in an official-looking tome that was more for show than actual enforcement. These regulations were the result of countless hours spent in town meetings, where villagers debated the merits of nesting box dimensions and appropriate chicken-to-coop ratios, like they were discussing matters of national importance. In truth, they were. Because let's be honest, a poorly maintained coop could lead to the spread of disease. And nothing says medieval crisis like an outbreak of chickenpox, or whatever the medieval equivalent was. The inspectors, those valiant souls tasked with enforcing these rules, were the true unsung heroes of the poultry world. They wielded their clipboards like swords as they entered coops, ready to wage war on anything that might be amiss. The typical inspection began with a dramatic flourish, as inspectors donned their finest cloaks, likely lined with feathers from previous inspections. With a keen eye for detail, they would meticulously examine the coop structure, looking for any signs of decay, disrepair, or heaven forbid, poor ventilation. Yes, ventilation. A poorly ventilated coop was akin to a medieval death sentence for chickens, causing them to languish in the fetid air of their own making. Truly a horror story for the ages. Oh. Once inside, the inspectors would begin their checklist process, which could rival an episode of a reality show dedicated to home makeovers. Let's see, how many nesting boxes do we have here? 1, 2, 3. But look, this one is an inch too high. That's an automatic failure right there, my dear sir. The villagers would hold their breath as the inspector scribbled notes with the fervor of a novelist on a deadline. Each comment could send chills down the spine of the coop owner, who could find themselves flushed with anger, or worse, facing a fine that could cripple their poultry business for months. Oh, wow. And let's not forget the delightful game of What's That Smell that accompanied every inspection. Inspectors had to rely on their keen olfactory senses to discern the difference between slightly odorous and genuinely repugnant. A foul smell could lead to additional fines, a trip back to the village hall, and a set of hoops to jump through that could rival the most complex of medieval marriage negotiations. The stakes were high, and one misstep could lead to a loss of prestige in the eyes of one's fellow villagers. But as tedious as the inspections were, they did have their entertaining moments. Picture this: an inspector, with his clipboards and quills, inadvertently stepping into a particularly enthusiastic henhouse, only to emerge covered in feathers and squawking chickens. It was a scene worthy of a slapstick comedy, one that villagers would recount for generations, each retelling embellished just a little more than the last. The drama of coop inspections was a source of endless entertainment and fodder for gossip, ensuring that the mundane never became truly dull. As the night fell, and the village settled into a rhythm of sleep, one could almost hear the distant echoes of laughter, mingling with the soft clucking of contented chickens. The legacy of medieval chicken coop inspections lived on, a testament to the absurdity of human existence, where the line between the profound and the profoundly boring blurred into an intricate tapestry of daily life. In the grand tapestry of history, it's often these little details, like a village's meticulous inventory or the inspector's grimace at the scent of an unkempt coop, that remind us of the richness of human experience, even in its most mundane forms. Yeah. So, dear viewers, as you lay your heads down tonight, remember the medieval villagers, their trials and tribulations, and their relentless pursuit of poultry perfection. Because in the grand narrative of history, it's not always the grand events that define us. Sometimes, it's the quiet moments of absurdity, the hiccups of bureaucracy, and the ever-present clucks of chickens that tell the most enduring stories. As we delve deeper into the exasperating history of medieval village chicken coop inspection procedures, we find ourselves enveloped in a dizzying whirl of inventory protocols, material costs, and bureaucratic minutiae that would compel even the most fervent history buff to momentarily contemplate a career in competitive napping. Now, picture, if you will, a quaint medieval village, perhaps one that has survived the ravages of time and the whims of nature, like the indomitable little settlement of Cluckington-on-the-Moor. Here, the villagers are not just passive participants in the grand drama of existence. They are engaged in a never-ending battle against the perils of poultry management. Yes, dear viewers, this is a world where every chicken is not merely a source of sustenance, but a fragile entity subject to the stringent scrutiny of the local inspector. Now, let us talk about the inventory procedures. The first step in this bureaucratic ballet was the creation of the infamous chicken ledger, a tome that was less a book and more an endurance test for the inscribers. Village scribes, who had been largely overlooked in the annals of glamorous medieval life, were often tasked with this laborious duty of maintaining a meticulous record of each fowl, down to the last feather. The ledger would include the chicken's name, age, breed, and in certain particularly fastidious villages, its favorite grain. Yes, you heard that right. Favorite grain. Because after all, what is a chicken if not a connoisseur of corn? The ledger entries were as colorful as the chickens themselves. A sample might read like this. On this day of St. Hubert, the great chicken inspector, Sir Cluxalot, hereby confirms the presence of Henrietta, a delightful hen of the Orpington breed, who has a predilection for barley and is presently in her third week of laying. It was a laborious task, and one could hardly blame the scribes for occasionally indulging in a bit of creative embellishment. Let's face it, after writing about Henrietta for the umpteenth time, even the most noble of clerks might be tempted to spice things up with a side note about Henrietta's alleged romantic escapades with a dashing rooster named Sir Pex-a-Lot. However, the inventory did not stop at mere names and preferred snacks. No, my friends, the chickens had to be categorized into various grades, which were determined by a comprehensive set of criteria that would make modern-day quality control experts weep with jealousy. A chicken's physical condition was assessed through a thorough examination of feathers, beak, and, let's not forget, the notorious butt inspection. Yes, the rear end of a chicken was a focal point of scrutiny, primarily due to its potential for disease. The butt, you see, was a gateway to all sorts of avian afflictions, and if a chicken's rear was found lacking, it could lead to dire consequences, like being unceremoniously banished to the not fit for consumption category. And what of the costs? Ah yes, the costs. This was where the joy of chicken coop inspections turned into a maddening game of financial chess. Villagers had to keep a keen eye on the expenses associated with their poultry endeavors, which were as varied as the number of feathers on a hen. The cost of feed fluctuated wildly, dictated by seasonal availability and the unpredictable whims of the weather. A particularly harsh winter could lead to skyrocketing prices for oats, and you can bet that when Old Man Grimble, the local feed merchant, raised his prices, the villagers would gather in hushed tones, lamenting their diminishing chicken fortunes over stale bread and sour ale. But the expenses did not end with mere feed. The construction and maintenance of coops were also a key consideration. Imagine the lengths to which the villagers went to ensure their coops were up to snuff. Wooden beams, straw for bedding, and a steady supply of nails that were all too often pilfered by mischievous children on a quest to build their own ramshackle structures. The cost of materials could fluctuate more than a chicken in a windstorm, leaving many a villager to question whether their poultry was worth the investment. In a stroke of bureaucratic brilliance, each village was required to stockpile a certain amount of materials for coop repairs. This led to a delightful competition among villagers to see who could accumulate the most rotting wood and rusty nails, an accomplishment that was, of course, proudly recorded in the chicken ledger. On this day, Farmer Gregor proudly boasts a stockpile of 28 splintery logs and a selection of 17 nails, all rusted to perfection. Truly, he is the king of coop repairs. The villagers would nod solemnly, as if Gregor's stockpile were a veritable treasure trove, while inwardly they were all thinking, "What a waste of space." Now, let's not overlook the inspectors themselves, those brave souls who donned their cloaks and wielded their feathered quills with the authority of an iron-fisted ruler. These inspectors were often tasked with more than just checking for chicken health. They were responsible for ensuring that coop conditions complied with the ever-evolving regulations set forth by the village council. These regulations were a labyrinthine web of rules, which included the appropriate distance between coops to avoid the dreaded phenomenon known as cross-cluck. Standards for sanitation, a euphemism for "please don't let the chicken poop pile reach" astronomical levels, and even guidelines on whether or not a hen could be designated as free rein based on its adherence to certain roaming limits. The inspectors wielded a set of instruments that could only be described as comically inadequate for the task at hand. Armed with a stick for poking, a notebook, and an impressive collection of frowns, they would make their rounds, examining coops with the intensity of a royal surgeon. "Ah, yes, Mr. Hargrove. I see you've used a straw roof this year. Very innovative. But may I remind you that the last storm resulted in a deluge of hay bales cascading down the hillside. You might want to consider upgrading to a thatched roof if you wish to avoid a repeat of that fiasco." The unfortunate consequence of these inspections was that they often sparked wild debates and scandals that would echo through the annals of village gossip for decades. Did you hear about old Lady Muriel? The inspector found a single unclean feather in her coop. A single feather. I dare say her chicken rights may be revoked at the next village council meeting. Such phrases spread like wildfire, lighting up the village tavern conversations, transforming mundane evenings into theatrical reenactments of the inspector's findings. Us. Moreover, let's not forget the role of the village council in this narrative. Meeting in the dimly lit alehouse, they debated the merits of various chicken breeds, as if they were discussing the merits of kings and queens. "I propose we endorse the Sussex hen, a fine bird for both egg production and meat," exclaimed a particularly passionate councilman, prompting another to counter with, "Oh, but have you considered the leghorn? Their egg-laying prowess is unmatched. Surely we must prioritize efficiency over looks." The discussions could rage on for hours, fueled by ale and the insatiable desire to best one another in the realm of poultry politics. In the end, dear viewers, the medieval chicken coop inspection procedures reveal a world where the absurdity of human existence manifests itself in the most mundane of details. from meticulous inventories to the cost of Coop repairs, and the bureaucratic battles that ensued. These seemingly trivial matters were steeped in the very essence of community life. It serves as a reminder that history is often not made of grand deeds, but rather the quiet, clucking chorus of chickens and the relentless pursuit of poultry perfection that keeps the wheels of civilization turning, one coop inspection at a time. As we delve deeper into the mind-numbing world of medieval poultry oversight, we encounter the most thrilling aspect of this entire saga: the inventory procedures. Yes, you heard that right. The noble art of counting chickens has never been more riveting. Picture this: a damp, dimly lit village hall, where the smell of wet straw mingles with that of overripe vegetables, as local officials gather to tally the fowl. The air is thick with tension, and perhaps a hint of stale ale as they prepare for the grand counting of chickens, an event that would make even the most devoted fans of the chicken race yawn with boredom. Wow. Each villager was required to submit a detailed inventory of their chickens, which, if you can believe it, was a matter of great import. The inspection documents were meticulously crafted, complete with columns and rows that would make even the most ardent spreadsheet enthusiast weep with joy. Villagers would list each hen's age, breed, egg-laying frequency, and in some cases the color of their feathers, because of course everyone knows that a chicken's feather color can significantly impact its societal standing. Imagine the drama of that particular meeting. I refuse to acknowledge that Mrs. Grumbleton's hens lay blue eggs. Everyone knows blue eggs are a myth. After these riveting discussions, the inspectors would then compare the villagers' reports against the official register, a hefty tome that had likely been passed down through generations. It was akin to the most tiresome episode of a reality show, where contestants face off against one another, but instead of glamorous challenges, they had to endure the grueling task of referencing a dusty book filled with the names of chickens long since eaten or retired from the egg-laying game. But we mustn't forget the joys of material costs. Yes, dear viewers, the financial implications of chicken coop maintenance were nothing short of scandalous. Any self-respecting villager knew that the quality of their coop materials could mean the difference between a thriving flock and a sad feathered disaster. The go-to choice was predictably wood, a resource as common as gossip in a medieval village. However, not just any wood would do. It had to be the finest, most resilient timber, suitable for withstanding the elements and the relentless pecking of those feathered beasts. An enterprising villager might offer oak, known for its strength, while another might try to pass off the more feeble pine. Pine? For a chicken coop? You'd be better off building it out of papier-mâché. One frustrated inspector might exclaim, his face reddening with rage. The prices fluctuated wildly based on season, demand, and whether or not the local lumberjack had managed to sleep the night before. A bad night's sleep for him could mean a significant price hike for the villagers, because nothing says poultry paradise like a hefty lumber bill. Then there were the roofing materials, which required a careful selection of thatch or shingles, again, dependent on the whim of the weather gods. Thatching, while all the rage for its rustic charm, could easily lead to a damp coop if not expertly done, leading to a veritable chicken spa filled with disgruntled birds. Why yes, we would love to host a chicken retreat. All rooms come with a complimentary mud bath. Those tasked with coop inspection would frequently find themselves grappling with the difficult question of aesthetics versus functionality. On top of that, let's not overlook the delightful world of coop repairs. The medieval chicken coop repairman was perhaps the most unsung hero of all. With his trusty toolkit, comprising a hammer, some nails, and an unwavering sense of duty, he would traipse from coop to coop, assessing damage like a master artist critiquing a piece of work. Often he would find himself embroiled in debates over whether to patch a hole with straw or replace an entire wall. But good sir, a straw patch will only last until the next rain. Do we want chickens that are both damp and disgruntled? In the world of poultry politics, these repairs could ignite fierce arguments. It's not just a coop, it's a lifestyle, one villager might exclaim, arms flailing dramatically as if trying to take flight. The cost of repairs, of course, varied based on the materials used and the reputation of the repairman, leading to a veritable game of chicken, pun intended, among villagers as they navigated the complex social hierarchy of coop aesthetics. Eddie? Now, we must address the bureaucratic rules governing these inspections. Believe it or not, there were codified procedures in place that rivaled the most elaborate legal systems of later centuries. Imagine a dusty scroll, its surface covered in ink smudges, and the occasional chicken footprint, outlining the bureaucratic labyrinth villagers had to navigate before receiving their precious inspection seal of approval. Shire. The village inspector, often a figure of considerable scrutiny, had to adhere to a strict code of conduct that mandated everything from how to hold the inspection clipboard to the acceptable range of clucking sound levels during an inspection. Yes, you heard correctly. The volume at which the chickens clucked was actually noted. A calm coop leads to calm chickens, the inspector would remind the villagers, as they attempted not to roll their eyes at the sheer absurdity of it all. Yeah, moreover, inspectors had to fill out a comprehensive form detailing the coop's structural integrity, the health of each bird, and any signs of illness, because nothing spells community trust like a lengthy checklist filled with medical jargon. The villagers would often argue about the specific wording of these forms, leading to endless revisions and debates that could stretch into twilight. Do we refer to it as the chicken's respiratory distress, or simply a bit of a cough? That's going to change the entire inspection score. As the weeks dragged on, with villagers frantically trying to meet the inspection deadlines, it became common for neighbors to form inspection committees to help each other prepare. These committees were nothing more than an excuse to gather, gossip, and drink ale while half-heartedly discussing coop maintenance. Oh, I see your chickens are still in their mature stage. They are just chickens, dear. What do you expect? A talent show. A talent show. In the end, these inspections, laughable as they may seem, carried a significant weight in medieval society. A well-inspected coop could elevate a villager's social standing, leading to alliances and perhaps even a marriage proposal or two, while a poorly maintained coop could spell disaster, both for the chicken and the owner. Imagine the shame of being labeled a bad chicken parent. The whispers in the tavern would echo for generations. Bazinda. So, while we may chuckle at the absurdity of chicken coop inspection procedures, we must remember that they were a vital part of the medieval community's fabric. A web of regulations, squabbles, and the relentless pursuit of poultry perfection that kept the village alive, clucking, and quite literally, egging each other on. In a world where so much was uncertain, the stability of chicken coops provided villagers with a sense of security, even if that security was often just a flimsy wall made of questionable material. As you can see, the history of medieval chicken coop inspection procedures is a design tapestry of mind-numbing details, drawn from the depths of humanity's most mundane pursuits. Perhaps it is not just about the chickens and their coops, but about the connections we forge, the communities we build, and the ridiculous lengths we go to in the name of poultry perfection. And who could ever find that boring? As our story unravels, let's take a moment to peek behind the rickety doors of these coops and explore the mind-numbing world of medieval inventory procedures. Yes, inventory, an exhilarating topic that makes watching paint dry seem like an extreme sport. But here we are, ladies and gentlemen, ready to dive into the intricacies of chicken inventory like it's the most riveting thing since the invention of the wheel. First off, we must understand that the inventory process for chicken coops was nothing short of a bureaucratic marvel, or a bureaucratic nightmare, depending on your perspective. Villagers were tasked with keeping meticulous records of their feathery friends. This would involve a laborious counting process, which sometimes led to more arguments than a tavern brawl over the last tankard of ale. Imagine this. A farmer, let's call him Reginald, stands in front of his coop, scratching his head, trying to remember if he had 5 or 6 hens. Did that one sneak out last night? Was it a chicken or just a particularly aggressive rabbit? The suspense is palpable. Reginald would dutifully take out his parchment. Yes, parchment, the medieval equivalent of a sticky note and a spreadsheet rolled into one, and begin jotting down the numbers. If he were feeling particularly ambitious, he might even include the names of the chickens. After all, who wouldn't want to remember the difference between Henrietta, the plucky layer, and Clucky, the rather mischievous one who had a penchant for escaping? Yo. But the excitement doesn't end there. Oh no. Once the counting was done, Reginald had to submit his findings to the village inspector. This is where the real fun began, an inspection that was as rigorous as a medieval inquisition. The inspector, adorned in a robe that probably smelled of stale ale and disappointment, would come knocking on Reginald's door, clipboard in hand, ready to scrutinize every inch of the coop. "Let's see your records," he would demand, tapping his quill ominously against the parchment. Now, let's not forget the costs involved in maintaining these delightful coops. A chicken coop was not just a haphazard assemblage of stray wood. Oh, no. It was a feat of engineering, requiring precise measurements and a selection of materials that would make even the most seasoned builder weep. You see, the average medieval villager didn't have the luxury of a Home Depot. They had to source materials from their own land or barter with neighbors, turning every trip into a mini-adventure fraught with the risks of subpar timber and overpriced straw. Nah. Honorable. Let's break this down. The walls of a chicken coop had to be sturdy enough to deter raccoons, foxes, and the occasional disgruntled neighbor. Villagers often used whatever materials they could scrounge, be it wattle and daub, which is a fancy way of saying sticks and mud, or repurposed planks from old carts. The cost of these materials fluctuated more than the price of a pint of ale during a harvest festival. One day you could get a decent bundle of straw for a few pennies, while the next day it could cost you an arm and a leg, especially if you were negotiating with Old Man Wiggins, who had a reputation for price gouging when it came to straw. And who could forget the cost of feeding these poultry prodigies? A chicken in the medieval period wasn't merely an egg-laying machine. It was a financial investment, much like a medieval stock portfolio that could go belly up at any moment. The villagers had to contend with the fluctuating prices of grains, which could be affected by everything from droughts to wars. If the wheat harvest was poor, you could bet your last golden groat that hen feed prices would skyrocket, leading to disastrous consequences for those who couldn't keep their flocks well fed. Mau. Now, let's talk about the bureaucratic rules that govern chicken coop operations. Oh, the joy! The regulations were often a dense forest of red tape that would make even the most seasoned bureaucrat weep tears of joy, or perhaps frustration. These rules were designed to ensure that the chickens remained healthy, and that everyone played nice within the village. For instance, the infamous rule of foul proximity dictated how close one chicken coop could be to another. This was to prevent the spread of disease, and also, let's be real, to stop neighbors from hurling insults over the clucking of chickens at all hours. If Reginald's coop was too close to Barnaby's, a feud could ignite that would replay in tavern tales for years to come, complete with exaggerated tales of chicken duels and nighttime raids. Then, there were the inspections themselves. These were not merely a casual glance at the coop. They involved a full-blown checklist that would make a modern-day contractor cringe. Inspectors would check for ventilation, cleanliness, and even the emotional well-being of the chickens. Yes, you heard that right. Inspectors were known to ask questions like, "Are your chickens exhibiting signs of distress?" As if chickens could sit down on a therapist's couch and spill their guts about the existential dread of being a domesticated bird. That's it. This is where things can get particularly absurd. Imagine a group of villagers gathered, debating whether Mr. Barnaby's hens were more depressed than Reginald's. They'd pull out all sorts of evidence. Perhaps a neighbor would testify. I saw Henrietta looking particularly downcast yesterday. The drama, the intrigue, all over a chicken's mental state. She was stunned. Die. As time marched on, these inspection procedures became more formalized, evolving into a bureaucratic system that would put modern regulatory bodies to shame. Village councils were formed, filled with self-important individuals whose sole duty was to ensure that chicken coops met the ever-growing standards. Meetings were held, minutes were recorded, and debates ensued over the color of the coop and whether a thatched roof was truly necessary for optimal chicken happiness. Why? And let's not overlook the role of communal gatherings where villagers discussed the latest coop regulations. These were akin to the modern-day town hall meetings, where the stakes were high, and the gossip was even higher. The chicken coop was a hot topic. After all, everyone had a vested interest in poultry production and the accompanying scandal if one villager was found to have neglected their coop. Gee, imagine the tension as Reginald stands up, puffing out his chest, ready to defend his coop against accusations of substandard poultry housing. The villagers lean in, ears perked up like the chickens they cared for, eager for every morsel of gossip. Would Reginald be exonerated, or would he leave with a tarnished reputation and a hefty fine? The drama unfolded like an epic saga, and while the stakes seemed low in the world of medieval village life, they were as high as a chicken on a roost. What? All of this to say, the history of medieval village chicken coop inspection procedures is a rich tapestry woven with threads of absurdity, tedium, and a surprising amount of drama. One might think that such minutiae would be relegated to the footnotes of history, but in fact, they reveal the very essence of medieval life. As villagers navigated the complexities of chicken ownership, they were also weaving together a community, one regulation and one silly quarrel at a time. So, as we continue to explore the annals of this poultry history, let us remember that every tedious detail, every ridiculous argument, and every bureaucratic hurdle was not merely a fascinating footnote, but an essential part of the medieval experience. Because, in the end, what is history if not a collection of the most trivial pursuits that somehow managed to shape the world we live in today? And if we can glean anything from Reginald's coop, it's that even the most mundane aspects of life can be filled with hilarity, heart, and an unending supply of chicken puns. And there you have it. Chickens, coops, and endless inspections, right in the heart of the medieval experience. And there you have it, folks. The thrilling saga of medieval village chicken coop inspection procedures, where the stakes were as high as a hen on a perch. We've traversed the exciting landscape of regulations, from the strict quotas on coop dimensions to the riveting debates over the proper housing of poultry. Who knew that the fate of fowl could hinge on the meticulousness of a village inspector armed with nothing but a clipboard and a penchant for poultry? As we close the chapter on this feathered fiasco, remember that history isn't just about knights and battles. Sometimes, it's about the unsung heroes, like the chickens, who clucked their way through medieval bureaucracy. If you enjoyed this dive into the drudgery of yesteryears, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below about your favorite coop regulation. And hey, while you're at it, turn on loop for a never-ending journey through the most thrillingly tedious tales of history. Until next time, may your coops be ever compliant.